Hello, and thank you very much for tuning in to the podcast series by the New Silk Road Project. I'm your host today, Charles Stevens, the founder of the New Silk Road Project. This series is dedicated to understanding and raising awareness of one of the most important development strategies of the 21st century, China's Belt and Road Initiative. The centerpiece of the New Silk Road Project, an initiative supported by Jeep, CSIS, Magellan Capital, the University of St Andrews and Shira, was to travel the course of the Silk Road economic belt from London to Yiwu in eastern China, interviewing the key actors and academics along its course. We will have to apologise in advance for some of the tangential moments in this podcast series, and also the variable quality of audio footage. We do hope this series sheds important light into China's growing global presence and the significant changes taking place across Eurasia. Hungary is a country which has seen long-standing engagement with China. It has one of the largest number of Chinese minorities in the Central and Eastern European region, with over 30 to 35,000 in Budapest alone. This seemed like an appropriate place to discuss China's deepening ties with the region with Tamás Matura, assistant professor at Corvinus University of Budapest and the founder of the Central and Eastern European Centre for Asian Studies. Here we discussed with him some of the biggest problems that the Belt and Road Initiative is encountering, as well as some of their flagship projects, including the Belgrade-Budapest Railway and the Port of Piraeus.
Well, I started my career more than a decade ago as an Asia Research Fellow of the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs, which is a background institution of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Later I joined an international business school, ESCA School of Management, with campuses both here in Budapest, in Paris and in Shanghai. And I joined Corvinus University 4 or 5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, where I'm mostly responsible for courses and classes on Asian studies, first of all China, a little bit of Japan, Korea and Southeast Asia. Belt and Road Initiative, well, of course, it's very important and very interesting to most of the countries and to most of the experts here in Central and Eastern Europe, because our countries, first of all Hungary or Poland, we just simply geographically located at a very important location. So it's inevitable that the Belt and Road, at least its a continental part, has to trespass Central European countries, Hungary and Poland first of all. As you may know, because you just arrived from Poland, if I'm not mistaken, Poland is already a de facto Belt and Road country, thanks to the connection between the city of Chengdu and Łódź in Poland. But Hungary is already doing a lot to be part of this transcontinental connection, thanks to the Belgrade-Budapest railway line.
And as you just mentioned, the Belgrade-Budapest line, could you discuss a bit more about the significance of that? And also how it fits into the broader picture of Eurasian integration?
Well, there are a lot of question marks about the Belt and Road Initiative and about the Budapest-Belgrade railway line as well. As you may know, the European Union started an infringement procedure last year, and their major problem is that there is a serious lack of transparency regarding this project. So even here in Hungary, the level of knowledge on the Budapest-Belgrade railway line is pretty low. For example, all the studies, feasibility studies, are kind of confidential or state secrets for 15 years. So we have only a very limited information on the railway line. The point is, and it's very clear that it served Chinese interests to a pretty high extent. As it's well known, China is now the major owner of the port of Piraeus in Greece, and they would like to connect it to Central Europe through Macedonia, Serbia and Hungary. And from the Hungarian point of view, the railroad is quite problematic, because the track itself, it's a refurbishment or renovation of a track, 100 years old track, and the problem is that it literally evades every single major major Hungarian city in the countryside. So from the Hungarian point of view, we do not really see what the point is. The Chinese are pretty interested in that. From the Chinese point of view, it's a very, very successful, or will be a very successful project, because like in most cases when it comes to Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese model is that they offer the financial background in form of a loan or credit line. They would really like to have their own companies to build or to construct the railroad. And it seems, according to the latest news we have on the issue, that it's going to be a Chinese company to build it, or a Chinese-dominated conglomerate to build it. And at the very end of the day, Chinese stocks will roll on the railway line from Piros to the heart of Europe. Meanwhile, on the Hungarian side, the interest or the benefits are not that obvious. The interest rate offered by the Chinese is quite normal, so it's about 2 to 2.5% a year. 20 years, a 20-year-long project, 20-year-long financial project. And the final cost is enormous, so it's close to, or even over 2 billion euros, which is huge, especially compared to the fact that the railway line, to build it, the construction process is a very simple one. Because Hungary, the southern part of Hungary towards Serbia, is a flatland, a Hungarian big flatland, so there's no need to build any kind of tunnels, bridges, or any architectural, big stuff. So just plain, the Great Plain down to the south. So nobody was really able to explain why is it so expensive, because even when it comes to the per kilometer price, it's something like 3 billion forints, it's like 10 million euros every single kilometer, and it sounds pretty expensive. The construction hasn't started yet in Hungary. As far as we know, in Serbia it's been going on for a while. There are problems in Macedonia because of the local domestic political turmoil. But the problem is, at least according to my understanding, that all benefits are on the Chinese side and all risks are on the Hungarian and the European side, because even if the Chinese will not be able to build the entire section in Macedonia, and there will be no chance to send goods, Chinese goods from Greece to Hungary, the Chinese, they will get back, the down payment and the interest rate. Their company had the chance to build, to construct a section in the European Union, which is a huge advantage to the Chinese, because this will be the first major Chinese infrastructure construction process within the boundaries of the European Union. So you may understand it as kind of a masterpiece, and the Chinese desperately need it in order to be able to run for other tenders later in the future in other European countries, because they will be able to show or to point at the Hungarian section that, wow, we will be able to deliver a railroad according to European standards. So it's super important to the Chinese, but from the Hungarian point of view, we do not really see what the point is.
And as you mentioned throughout that, it seems to be that the benefits are mainly on the Chinese side. What does this say about the priorities of Orbán and his government?
Well, the 16+1 means the context of this entire Chinese Central European cooperation. 16+1 cooperation was unofficially established in Budapest in 2011 during the first China-Central Europe meeting, and it was established officially a year later in 2012 in Warsaw, when the first China-Central Europe summit took place. And last year in 2017, the summit returned to Budapest, so Hungary has always been at the forefront of this cooperation, and the Hungarian government, this government and previous governments as well, have always been eager to establish very good relations with the Chinese. However, when it comes to the 16+1 cooperation itself, I think that governments in Central Europe, all around Central Europe, are quite disappointed nowadays because of the lack of tangible results of the cooperation between China and the region. Especially because, on the other hand, there have been many complaints and there have been many suspicions suspicions or even accusations on the side or from the European Union or from Berlin or Paris. Most of the Western European partners of Central Europe accused Eastern and Central Europe and China that China and the 16+1 project itself is a Chinese attempt to divide and rule the European Union. It's not true, but it meant a kind of a political cost to Central European countries to be part of the 16+1 cooperation. And meanwhile, when it comes to, if you really want to have a list of the tangible results of the 16+1, that list would be very, very short. Especially it would be very short when it comes to stuff what are really important to Central European countries, greenfield investment, new jobs, technology, and so on and so forth. Nothing has been materialized in this regard in Central Europe, even though the Chinese invested a lot of money in these countries. But the form of investment has always been mergers and acquisitions and not new kind of investment into greenfield projects and stuff like that. So when it comes to the Hungarian government, I believe that in the first few years of the 16+1 cooperation and the first few years of the Hungarian-Chinese relations since 2010. In that period, the Hungarian government was really eager to find new financial opportunities, business opportunities, trade and investment. So the main purpose was economic in nature. But it seems that in the last few years, in the last 3-4 years, maybe the Hungarian government turned towards political interest. It seems that the Hungarian Prime Minister tries to use the Chinese connection or our good relationship with China as a bargaining chip vis-à-vis the European Union or even Berlin or even sometimes maybe America. And he tries to, the Hungarian Prime Minister tries to show off, if you like, that he has the chance and he has the opportunity and the ability to meet the Chinese counterpart every year. And last year, the Hungarian Prime Minister even kind of, if I may say so, blackmailed Germans when he made a speech in Germany and he told to the audience over there, German policymakers and business leaders, that if the European Union cannot or will not support financially Central and Eastern Europe anymore in the upcoming years, in the upcoming next 7-year budgetary period of the EU, then we will turn to China. On the one hand, it's an obvious and blatant bluff, because you cannot really compare free European money or more or less free European money, European funds, to Chinese loans. Not in quality and not in quantity as well, because the European Union offers, I think, 150 billion euros to the region in the last 7 years, and the total Chinese investment in the region is maybe 4, 5, maximum $6 billion or euros. So, there's a huge difference between the two.
And you talked about the importance of Hungary providing an access point for China to gain tenure in the wider European Union. With the growing authoritarianism of Orbán, with the Stop Soros campaign, for example, do you think Hungary still has that advantage, and can China still have this relationship if its legitimacy is undermined through that?
I get your point. It's indeed true that what makes Hungary particularly interesting to Beijing and to Moscow is our membership in the European Union and our strong voice in the European Union. And to some extent, I think the voice of the Hungarian Prime Minister is stronger than it's supposed to be compared to the size of the country. So frankly speaking, this is a beautiful country, good food, and so on, but we produce 0.7% of the GDP of the European Union. And compared to that, the visibility, if you like, of the Hungarian Prime Minister is enormous. But that's indeed true that that's our only major asset, what might be interesting to Beijing and to Moscow. To Moscow, of course, our NATO membership is another important asset, but from the point of view of Beijing, that doesn't really matter. So, of course, I wouldn't dare to mention a potential Huxit or Hunksit, or I don't know whether there is a proper word in English, so Hungary leaving the European Union, like Brexit. It won't happen. It won't happen, obviously, because we desperately need the European Union, and Germany needs Hungary as well, to a certain extent. But that's also true that even me, personally, I was told several times by Chinese colleagues, even higher-ranking people in Beijing, that they do understand the game the Hungarian Prime Minister tries to play play vis-à-vis Brussels, to use China as a leverage, but they don't want to be part of this game. Because they were pretty frank to me. They told me, and I totally understand them, and I totally agree with them, that Hungarian-Chinese relations are very special, very important, and it has always been so. So it's not a product of the last 7 or 8 years. Hungary was one of the first countries, if not the first country in Central Europe, to re-establish a good relationship with China back in 2003. So as soon as we signed our accession treaty to the European Union in May 2003, 2 or 3 months later, the Hungarian Prime Minister of the time rushed to China, and this part of the world has always had a good relationship with China because of their common past. But it's indeed true that Hungarian-Chinese relationship is important to Beijing, but it's nothing compared to German-Chinese or EU-Chinese relationship.
And what can Hungary offer in a reciprocal sense to China in the form of technological expertise or high technology, because this is of course something that China is very interested in?
Well, long story short, nothing. So of course there are some Hungarian technologies what might be interesting to the Chinese, and one of their biggest investment in the region, and actually it's one of their biggest investment in Europe, was the acquisition of a Hungarian chemical company back between 2009 and 2011. That was a story of something like 2 billion euros altogether, so it was a nice decent amount of money, so they were interested in that. But otherwise, the major problem is that even when some Hungarian companies have a certain technology which might be important or interesting to the Chinese, these Hungarian companies are so small that they don't have the size, the financial ability to advertise themselves in China. So it's not that easy to show yourself, to represent yourself in China. But for example, there are some very good examples. There is a Hungarian company called Organica, which has a very unique technology in water purification. And they purify water through kind of biological matter. So they create, it looks like a beautiful, how do we call it, greenhouse. Like in a Kew Garden in London, it looks like a greenhouse. You can put it into the middle of a city, and there are beautiful plants inside, palm trees, whatever, but beneath the ground there is a water purification system what can treat the wastewater of an entire district of a city. And they are there in China. They have a representative office in China, so there are some good opportunities, but otherwise, not only in Hungary, but for most of the Central European small and medium-sized enterprises, China is too far away. And of course we have other opportunities in our broader region, in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Russia, even in North America, because there are many bad experiences about China, and these bad experiences are well known among the members of the business community, that to start a business in China is full of problems, obstacles, traps. So I think that there are many companies in Hungary and in Central Europe which might be successful in China, but they just simply do not want to go there.
And a coherent national strategy towards China is something that has been widely discussed in Hungary. What are the barriers to establishing this? What do you think would be the benefits if this happens, and the likelihood of it happening?
It's a very interesting question, and I don't have too much information on that. What I know that last September or October, the European Commission announced their plans to introduce that investment monitoring system or something like that to the entire European Union. And they started to make a search online on the Hungarian legal environment, and they just found that 2 months in advance, so in last August, the Hungarian Minister of Interior proposed an act or a legislation to introduce such a monitoring system which would enable the Ministry of Interior to monitor potential foreign investments into certain sectors of the economy, special sectors or sensitive sectors of the economy, and the government would be the entity to give permission. But since last August, I haven't heard any news on that, so I'm not sure whether it was even enacted, whether it it in force, or it was just, some kind of attempt in Hungary to show to the European Union that there is no need for a EU-wide legislation on the matter, because it's better to keep it in the hands of nation states. And I'm just speculating, but the Hungarian Prime Minister is, kind of a guy who doesn't really like the supranational part of the European Union. So he's crying to see the UK to leave, because the UK was one of the major allies of the Hungarian Prime Minister and most of the people like him. So that would really make sense from his point of view to establish some kind of environment in the EU where he could argue that there is no need for an EU-wide system of monitoring investment, because it's better to keep it in nations or national hands.
And Hungary, and specifically Budapest, where we are now, it has the National Tourist Office for the whole of the CEE region. I believe one of the Hungarian MEPs in the parliament cited tourism as a key pillar of the Belt and Road Initiative in Europe. Is this something you agree with, or do you see other forms of partnership as more important?
Obviously, there are more important stuff between China and the European Union. Just think about the enormous bilateral trade in goods, which I think we are close to 2 billion euros every single day. It's something like that, or the enormous inflow of Chinese investment into the European Union. Germany is pretty concerned of that. France is concerned of that, because the Chinese have been buying up very sensitive technology in the European Union. So there are more important issues, but that's also true that tourism, China is, how do we say that, untapped. China has a huge untapped potential. If I'm not mistaken, something like 1 or 2% of all Chinese citizens have a passport. And China is already one of the biggest, sender of tourists, one of the biggest spenders when it comes to tourists. They spend more than Americans. They spend way more than Japanese and Germans when they travel abroad. And China already sends more than 100 million people abroad every year. Only a tiny the fragment comes to Europe, because most of them go to Japan, Hong Kong, South Korea, so they move around their own region. But there is a huge potential over there, and I think the opportunities there, especially to countries like Hungary and other Central European countries, where we cannot really boost our trade relations with China because we have nothing to sell to the Chinese, or not much to be sold to the Chinese. But tourism is, the form of trade when the customer comes to get what he or she wants. So it's a very, very good investment. And Central European countries, I think we can say that one of the, maybe intangible, but one of the results of the 16+1 cooperation, that awareness of Central Europe about China and the other way around has been increasing in the last 6-7 years. So the amount of Chinese tourists coming to Hungary or to the Czech Republic has been rising very rapidly. So it's a good opportunity, and we can make a lot of money out of it, to put it very simple. But let me remind you that, for example, there are some certain countries like Croatia where there are already voices saying that we do not want to have more Chinese tourists. We do not want to have more tourists at all, because we do not have the capacity, we do not have the infrastructure. And the problem is when a country gets popular among Chinese tourists, they move in flocks, so they just rush into that country. And a small country like Croatia, what could they do with 500,000 or 1 million or 2 million Chinese tourists? They would suffocate there.
Thank you. You've written a bit about, or I mean very well, on the perceptions and a little bit on public awareness of the rise of China and China as a nation in Central and Eastern Europe. What do you think the perception is of the Belt and Road Initiative in this region?
I just finished a paper on that topic this very morning. I'm sending it in a few hours to Japan. I was a proud member of Project Chinfluence, where we monitored and assessed the media discourse about China in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. And thanks to the project, we have an enormous database from all the three countries about the most important topics covered by the media regarding China. And Belt and Road was one of the topics we digged into the details, how Belt and Road Initiative was depicted or is depicted or understood in Central and Eastern Europe. And it was a very interesting finding. It surprised even me that compared to the fact that more than 50% of the news, the coverage on Chinese economy and politics here in Hungary, and we analyzed 4,000 articles published between 2010 and 2017, so it's a huge pool of articles. And 50% of these articles focused on Chinese economy, business relations, so on money, if I may say so. And compared to that, altogether 3% of the articles mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, 2% in Slovakia, 1.4% in the Czech Republic. So it's quite surprising because the Belt and Road Initiative is about bilateral economic relations, at least according to the Central European point of view. And the coverage on the topic was still extremely low. I have some potential explanations on that. First is that I think the West in general does not understand the Belt and Road Initiative. Many people, even China experts, say that the initiative or what the Chinese communicate about the initiative, it's so unclear, it's so vague, it's you cannot really grab it. The problem is that the Western people and the East Asian people have a very different mindset. So East Asian people, they believe, the bottom, the grassroots development. That let's start it. We know more or less what we want to achieve, but let's start it and we'll see where it evolves or what it evolves into. Meanwhile, Western people, especially, Germanized people like the Hungarians and the Germans themselves, first we make the plan, the detailed plan, the roadmap, the feasibility study, this and that, and when everything is done to, the final detail, then we introduce the project that we want to do this and that. The two different mindset is so different to each other that people do not understand it. I visited Berlin maybe last year or 2 years ago, and there were people complaining me, business people complaining me that hey Tamás, we just received the Chinese delegation, and the Chinese, they asked us that what should we do in the Belt and Road Initiative, and we the Germans, we replied them that hey, it's your idea, tell us what to do in the Belt and Road Initiative. So there is a problem with the mindset, and that's one of the major explanations why I say that the impact or the understanding, the awareness about the Belt and Road Initiative is pretty low in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, in Slovakia, and I presume in most European countries.
And if we could pursue this a bit further, how does this break down in terms of demographics? Is this awareness higher, or the perceptions change with journalists, with politicians, with the general public, with academics like yourself? I mean, did you look at this in your study? Okay, let me stick to the findings in Hungary, because I could talk a lot about Czech Republic and Slovakia, but in Hungary it's very interesting. When it comes to the political elite, Hungary is pretty different from the Czech Republic and from Slovakia, because in Hungary I believe that there has always been a kind of it seems that in Hungary the journalists are way more skeptical, but the situation is quite surprising because thanks to the very special media environment and the very special domestic political environment here in Hungary, media workers or media sources close to the government, they tend to offer a very bright picture of China and the Belt and Road Initiative, while people and media sources on the opposition side or anti-government media sources, usually they tend to offer a very bad picture, a very critical picture of China and of the Belt and Road Initiative as well. However, it's not that easy to detach in these articles. It's not easy to detach whether they just simply want to bash the Hungarian government and the China policy of the Hungarian government, or they really want to, depict China in a negative way. So it's a bit of a mixed
The results are mixed. And when it comes to the wider public, the European Union Eurobarometer last September, if I'm not mistaken, published an EU-wide public opinion survey about the perceptions of China in different European countries. And to my surprise, Central and Eastern European countries are not that happy about China. I mean, the people, the general public. There is no real obvious and visible support in Central and Eastern European countries towards China compared to Western European countries. The European average is 32%, so 32% of the people around Europe have a positive view on China. In Hungary, it's 40%. So it's somewhat higher, but it's still a relative minority. In the Czech Republic, it's 25%. So the Czechs, the general Czech public, has a very bad and negative understanding of China. However, I would still argue that in Hungary, despite the fact that this is a pretty xenophobic country, so like most of the Central and Eastern European countries, Hungary is not the most xenophobic in the region, but generally speaking, Hungarians are not that welcoming to foreigners who want to stay in the country. And despite that, we like the Chinese, if I may say so. The reason is probably that the Chinese minority is pretty big in Hungary. It's probably the biggest one in the region. So according to estimates, it's somewhere between 30 to 35,000 people. And most of them live in the capital city. And the overwhelming majority of these people, these Chinese people, moved to Hungary by the end of the 1980s and early 1990s. So almost like 30 years ago. And they supported the Hungarian living standard when it was, decreasing rapidly after the change of the regime. So in the mid-1990s, early 2000s, the average living standard was lower than in the early 1980s. And the cheap Chinese products, the Chinese flea markets, they really contributed to the relative well-being of Hungarian people. Plus, it's a very general assumption of most of the Hungarian people that when it comes to Chinese, the typical stereotype about the Chinese people among Hungarians that, okay, they are diligent people, they work hard, they keep a low profile, so quite surprising, but there is no proper Chinatown in Budapest. Because they spread around the city. So we have a rather positive understanding of the Chinese people here in Hungary.
And just before we close up, what do you think is the single greatest challenge to the Belt and Road Initiative in the next 5 years?
Lack of understanding. I think that's the most obvious one, although it sounds a bit vague, but I think that's the major problem, that the Chinese talk a lot about it. The Chinese have or organize a lot of events on the Belt and Road Initiative. Sometimes I even have a feeling that they overreact, or they do too much. So, for example, even myself, I think theoretically I'm a member of 3 different China, Central Europe, Belt and Road friendship groups. And they organize 3-4 different China, Europe, Belt and Road think tank forum. So I cannot even keep a track record what I'm a member of. It's obviously the reason is the reason stems in the Chinese domestic political environment, that every single province, every single city, every single institution wants to have some kind of Belt and Road Initiative related activity. But it's too much. And once again, the West doesn't understand it. The Chinese cannot convince the West that the Belt and Road is not about geopolitics. And frankly, the Chinese cannot convince me. It obviously has a very strong geopolitical tendency. The Belt and Road Initiative. It would be stupid to not to recognize it. And the Belt and Road Initiative, I think, at least from a Western perspective, especially from the perspective of America, it's kind of a manifestation of the changing world system. Or the world system as we know today, will be totally different in a few years or decades, and BRI may play a very significant role over there. I also teach international relations theory, and one of the most important theories nowadays is the theory on hegemonic cycles. And we always say, it's a kind of a foundation of this theory, that the hegemonic country, the hegemonic nation always creates, builds, finances and manages the international system and the institutions and the regimes of the international system. This is the United States right now, and it has been the United States since the end of the Second World War. And now it seems that China started to build its own parallel international system. Belt and Road Initiative, Free Trade Agreement of the Asia-Pacific, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, New Development Bank of the BRICS countries. I do not blame the Chinese. I would do the same, of course. And I do not blame the Chinese because they have been trying so hard to get a bigger say in the incumbent system, and Washington refused to give them a bigger say. So I think it's very obvious and very normal that the Chinese decided to go this way. But still, it means one single thing, that they want to create maybe not a new, but a parallel international system, or an international system where China has a bigger say. And countries like America, or countries like the UK, countries like France, and to some extent Germany, so the countries which used to be the great powers of this system or the previous system, they don't like it. It's very obvious that even within the European Union there is a clear division. Major Western European countries, the three big ones I just mentioned, they are pretty concerned of the rise of China, the political and global rise of China. Countries on the periphery, but including Northern Europe, Central Europe and Southern Europe, or smaller countries, we do not really mind, because, okay, it used to be in this part of the world the Soviet Union, before that Germany, now it's America, in the western part of Europe it used to be the UK to rule the world, now maybe it's going to be China.
And I promise, final question.
That's fine.
If you were going to summarise the Belt and Road Initiative in one word,
no.
What is it to you?
It's impossible. I cannot.
Impossible, maybe.
Yeah, I cannot. Maybe it's a very, very bad final word. But let me quote one of the important officials of the European External Action Service, because I think this quotation gives a real insight into how Europe, or at least some important people in Europe, understand the Belt and Road. And a few years ago, under Chatham House rules, but he told me that, you know, Tamás, I think the Belt and Road Initiative is nothing more but the most expensive public relationship exercise in the history. So, at least according to some people, it's a PR exercise and nothing more. I think it's a bit more, but we still need to analyze and to understand it.